Hey everybody, and welcome back. This is going to be hopefully the first of a series of videos in which we will be creating our zombie smashing game. Now this is going to be sort of tailor-made more so towards people who are just getting into game development and who are beginners, and as such I will be trying to take my time in explaining everything as it happens on the screen. So without further ado, we're just going to jump into it. Now, right in front of you, what you see is a brand new blank Unity project. All I've done is just created the empty project and hit 2D in the settings. And that's what we essentially get here. So the first thing that what I'm going to do in this video is we're going to be setting up the scene for the rest of the game, and I'm also going to kind of trying to be explaining to you how I'm going to set up the project and how we're going to be essentially building it. So the first thing that we need is I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop some resources into this project. Now, as you can see, there are going to be a bunch of sprites and some audio files that they're going to be loading in, and I will provide these to you, and all you will really have to do is just drag and drop it just like that into your assets folder. These sprites and these audio files, essentially, they will kind of help us populate the whole scene. Hey everybody. At the time of making this video, I had forgot to emphasize something, which is why I'm making this video, because it's a little bit important. So along with this lecture, you will find this resources folder, and you can drag and drop this resources folder here, right under assets. It's going to take a little while, so give it a couple seconds, and Unity will go ahead and import all of those resources in for you. Once Unity is done importing, if you go here in the sprites, one of the things that I want to emphasize is all of these sprites that we're going to use, they need to have a texture type of Sprite 2D and UI. So if in your case, if they are set to anything else, if they're set to default or anything else really, we want to change them all to Sprite 2D and UI. So you can go ahead and select all of the ones that are not essentially Sprite 2D and UI, and you can change them on to Sprite 2D and UI. Once you have gone ahead and done that, don't forget to scroll at the bottom here and hit the apply button. So now that it's done, it might take a little bit of time depending on your specifications. Now these aren't very heavy files, they're all mostly just 2D, so it shouldn't take a very long time. But anyways, inside the resources folder, you can see that there are two folders. One is audio and one is sprites, and the audio contains all of the audio that we will be using, and the sprites contain all of the sprites. And once again, I will be providing these to you. So anyways, without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to start setting up our scene, and as we set up the scene, we'll talk about how we're going to build up this game. So over here, I'm going to click on zombie underscore gameplay underscore background. This is just going to be the background of our entire game. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this into our hierarchy. Okay, notice over here it says hierarchy. This is going to be the collection of all of the objects in our game. So as soon as I drop this background into the hierarchy, you can kind of see it here. I want to point your attention to these two tabs here, the scene view and the game view. Now the game view is essentially going to show you what the camera is seeing and what the output on the screen is going to be, the output that the user is going to see, okay? And the scene view is essentially going to be a place where you can pretty much sort of move your game objects around and position them and place them and, you know, rotate them if you need to, and so on and so forth. So the scene view is essentially where you'll be doing a lot of the setup, but when you hit the play button, like right now, what's going to happen is it's automatically going to switch over to the game view. So this, what you see right here, as you can see here, it says game, and this is the game view. Also, maximize on play is hit, so if that's something that you don't want to do every time you hit the play button, you can uncheck it here in the game view. And now if I hit the play button, the screen will not maximize, okay? Really quickly, I'm going to bump the scale down to 1 because you could see that when the scale was high, it was pixelating, and we do not want that. So we just want the scale to be 1x, and just as a preference, I have chosen the 5:4 resolution. Anyway, so that is a little bit about the scene view and the game view. I'm going to go ahead and delete that game object, and I'm going to drag and drop a fresh copy in just for good measure. Okay, so this is going to be our background. Okay, now the name over here is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm still going to go ahead and maybe change that over here. Notice over here on the right side you have the inspector, okay? Now the inspector is something where when you click on a game object in your hierarchy, the inspector is going to help you essentially give you a little bit more information about what the object is and where it is and what sort of components are attached to it. And if none of what I'm saying makes sense to you, then just relax, take a deep breath, and we're going to walk through this together, and it'll be all okay and rainbows and sunshine. Alright, so let's look at some of these boxes here, okay? So these boxes here are called components. As you can see, there's a transform, there's a sprite renderer, and so on and so forth. Now, when I click on my background, notice that this here, inside the transform, is basically information about where in the world my object exists, okay? So notice how it talks about the position. That is, it's currently based at the origin, which is 0, 0, 0. If I were to change the x to, let's say, 6, it would move. If I were to change it to, I don't know, -6, it would move the other way. And hopefully that kind of makes sense. So when we go into scene view, right, and when I click on it, and once you've got your game object selected, if you click here, the move tool, you can essentially drag it and you can move it along like so. And I want to point attention to the transform here. Notice how these values are changing. So essentially we're just moving this object around and we are changing its transform. Furthermore, if you hit this rotate button here, you can then sort of rotate it, and once again you can sort of see the values of the Z rotation changing, or if you want to rotate it like so, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit more as to what the inspector is and the sort of things that you can learn in the inspector. Now for good measure, I'm going to change all of these values back to 0 for the transform and the rotation. Also here is the scale, so if you increase the scale, then you can essentially increase the scale. Goes without saying. Anyways, so what I want to do right now is essentially try and see if I can fit this background into the, and get rid of this blue stuff here. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. One of the ways, which we've already talked about, is we could essentially just increase the size of this. So we could do 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. Now notice the z-axis doesn't really matter right now because this is the third dimension and this is a 2D image. So, haha. Not really relevant at this point, and that is one easy way of kind of filling up the space. Let's see, maybe I can bump it up to 1.7, 1.7, and 1.7, and aha, now the whole background seems to be fitting well and sweetly into our camera. Now if I hit play, notice that the user will see this amazing, beautiful background. If you want to go and maximize it, you can see what the game background looks like. Okay, so we're off to a pretty decent start. Hopefully I haven't lost anybody yet. Very quickly, what I'm going to do is in the hierarchy, I'm going to click on my background image and I'm going to rename it just for good measure because this is such a weird name. So I can go ahead and just write background. You don't have to do this, it's just bugging me, so I went ahead and did it. If you're building complex games, then naming your game objects, naming your variables, naming your assets, naming your resources is going to be really important because after a while it's going to become like a fish market and you won't know where what is and what is. So therefore I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. I want to point your attention to this main camera here in the hierarchy, okay? Now notice this is the game view, and I've said that if you ever want to look a little bit deeper into what the game objects in this hierarchy are, you can switch over to the scene view. So we'll go ahead and do that, and I'll go ahead and click the main camera. And notice with the main camera is selected, you will see a lot of this information here. Now, if this main camera is the one that we get for free, when I say for free, what I just mean is that it's the one that was already there when I created the project, and we can create as many cameras as we want. But for the sake of this project, really all we need is just this one. Notice the camera also has some components to it. It also has the transform, so if I go ahead and if I were to move this around, for example, right, then notice how the camera preview here in the bottom right is also changing. So, and notice how the transform position is also changing. And I want to call out here that in the future, right, for example, And this is something that we might come across later in this project, but in general in games, if you wanted to have some sort of a recoil, right, in the game, then you could very quickly, you could think about maybe moving the camera around and maybe giving it a little bit of a jitter, making it feel a lot more sort of lively. Now, in that case, you wouldn't have to move the whole world around, you would just have to move the camera around. I say this because a lot of games, first-person shooters, or any other game where there is any sort of camera shake, it is essentially that it is a camera shake. So yeah, that was just something that was worth mentioning. And I'm going to go ahead and zero these out. The value of z here is by default -10, and this is just an arbitrary value, and that is so that the camera is in fact in front of the background and it is looking at the background. So if I go and switch to 3D mode just for the sake of explanation, notice this is how it looks, and you can see the blue line, which is the forward direction of the camera. It's looking right into that background. Now, if you're wondering how I did that, I clicked on this button here, and you can switch views. So really, that's all it is. But that's about what I wanted to say. Now, I want to talk about how we will be building the game. The way we will be building the game is that there are going to be these zombies which are going to be creeping up over here from these little holes, and we are going to be splashing them. So we need to go ahead and put some zombies in our scene. So over here in the resources folder, I have this My Zombies 1. Not the best way to name it, but it is what it is. And yeah, go ahead and just drag and drop the zombie into the hierarchy. Now, notice that the zombie is nowhere to be seen. Not in the scene view, not in the game view. If I hit the play button, I may or may not see it. I do not see it. So what's happened here? Well, what's happened here is that the camera is essentially Unity is essentially trying to draw two objects, and it's drawing both of those objects right on top of each other. So to that end, what we have to do is we have to tell Unity that we want to draw the zombie in front of the background. And we can do this by changing the order. Okay, so if I go here on my zombie, notice how there is a sprite renderer. The sprite renderer is essentially responsible for actually rendering the graphic onto the screen. So if I go to my background, for example, and if I untick here, this sprite renderer, then it gets rid of the whole background. So, and if I check it back, it enables it. So also, if you want to enable or disable a specific component on a game object, you can go here in the hierarchy and you can uncheck and basically disable that component. I say this because the sprite renderer is going to be important, because the sprite renderer, you can tell it, hey, what the order of drawing objects is. And in this case, what I want to do is I want to draw the zombie object on top of my background. So I'm going to try and give it a order in layer value of 1. And all it is basically the way it sorts those layers. As soon as I change the order in layer of the zombie to 1, then the zombie is now being drawn on top of the background. If I now go and make my background 2, then you can imagine that the background will now be being drawn in front of the zombie. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to 0, and I hope that this kind of makes sense. It's essentially like taking paper cutouts and then putting one in front of the other, and you need to know which one you need to place in front. Okay, so now that I have my zombie in my scene, notice I can switch over to my scene view and I can start moving this guy around. Now I can keep clicking on these objects, or sorry, these buttons here, or I can quickly just use the keys on my keyboard. So for example, if I use the E button, I can quickly rotate it. If I use the W button, I can quickly move it. If I use the R button, I can quickly scale it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and undo all of those changes. And the reason why I explain this to you is because you're free as you're learning, to basically use these buttons. But in case if you ever see me doing some of this stuff and you're wondering, holy crap, how did he do that? It's maybe just me using the hotkeys, as since I'm kind of used to that. And as you start using this more and more, you will get used to it also. Anyways. So as you can see, I can go ahead and move this zombie, and what's going to happen is in our game, we're going to position our zombie something like this. So we're going to position him under the ground, and when the game starts and the zombie spawns, he's going to move up like so, and it's going to feel like he's coming out of a hole. The way we're going to accomplish this effect is we're going to put the zombie here, and on top of the zombie we're going to put something called a mask. Now the mask is, I'm going to drag and drop this mask here from my resources folder onto the screen, and the mask is just going to be a blank, sort of a black game object. Now you don't see anything because it is being drawn behind the background. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and put the order in front of everything, because we want the mask to be being drawn in front of everything. The order for the zombie was 1, so for the mask we'll try 2. And now if I move the mask around, you'll be able to see all the mask is just a black sprite that is just being drawn. And we can use this black sprite essentially to go ahead and cover up our zombie. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. It's just like, once again, a couple of sheets of paper. And in our game, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and place all of our zombies like here in front of all of these little holes in the ground, and then we'll conveniently cover them up with a mask. And when the game starts, what we'll do is we will start, we will move the zombies from here like so, increasing their Y position, right? We talked about the transform. So notice as I move it up and down, the Y position changes, but all the other positions, the X and the Y and the rotations, they all stay the same, right? And that makes sense because this green direction here, it also is the Y direction. So what we'll do is we'll essentially be tweaking the Y coordinate of the position, the transform, and we will be moving it up, and once it gets to a certain point we will start moving it back down. And because of the help of the mask, it's going to feel as if the zombie is really coming out of a hole in the ground, but it won't really be coming out of a hole. It'll just be like an illusion trick that we do, and that is essentially what game development is. It's just a bunch of illusions. Okay. So with that said, what I'll do is I'll start placing some of these zombies. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this mask in my scene for now, and I'll go ahead and position some of these zombies. Now I already have been tweaking around with these zombies a little bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the values that I know, and you're free to go ahead and use these values or any other values which work for you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use some of these values that I have already prepared. I want to say that the values, when I'm copy pasting these values here, I don't want you to freak out. I don't want you to think like this is some crazy magic that just happened and these numbers popped in my head, because they didn't. Okay, these were just numbers that I have sort of already tweaked, and just for the sake of not wasting your time, I'm kind of going over this in a quick manner. Now what I did was I went ahead and dragged and dropped a lot of these zombies in my scene. Of course you can't see any of them because unlike the first one, all of the rest of them are at order layer 0. If you want to select multiple objects in the hierarchy, you can hold down the shift key and you can select the first one and the last one, and it selects all of them. And in this way I can go ahead and change their order to 1 all at the same time. And at this point what you would be doing is essentially you would be going and you would be putting them in like so, and why not, let's just do that together. You know what, so we'll go ahead and do that here, and just for our sake, let's just go ahead and go in order. So we'll put this one here. Okay, so that'll be the first one, and then the second one is here. Let's see, the third one can be this one, and the fourth one is going to be over here. And we can go ahead and tweak these later on, just if these values are not perfect, if their positioning are not perfect, then we can always go and change these later. So I'm going to go ahead and move this guy here, and I think we're missing one more. We can drag and drop another guy from here, or we can just duplicate one of this. All I have to do is Control C and Control V, and now I have another copy. Since I duplicated it, the order was already updated. Okay, so that is what it is, and everything is looking all right. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and create a mask. Alright, yeah, so now that we've gone ahead and placed all of these zombies in place, what I'm going to do is just to keep my hierarchy, essentially in order, what you can do is we can sort of put these guys in a single container, and we can call that zombies. So if I right click here in my hierarchy, I can create an empty game object. I can go ahead and rename this game object now zombies. Now notice how this empty game object, if I go in my scene, if I double click on it, it's just laying somewhere at this weird transform, position, rotation, etc. And I just want to recenter this, so I can click on this. If I hit on reset, it resets the entire transform. Now this is an empty game object, okay? And what I'll go ahead and do is I'll click on all of my zombies, and at this point I'll drag and drop them under my zombie game object, okay? So now all of these zombies are essentially coupled together. Remember when we talked about enabling and disabling game objects? So if I now go ahead and click here on the check mark, it will disable that game object, and therefore it will also disable all of its children, okay? And I can enable them back by clicking on this check button. This is not really important to the game per se, but this was just one of those Unity things that I thought were worthwhile mentioning. Okay, so now that we've got all of our zombies, we want to go ahead and get some masks in the game, okay? So let's go ahead and drag and drop a mask. And once again, we want to change the order priority, so we'll make that 2, I believe. And we'll really quickly check and see if that in fact works, and sure enough, it does. Also, you can use your mouse wheel to kind of scroll in the scene view just to see where you're placing these masks. And at this point, if you guessed it, we are going to go ahead and place these masks, okay? So I'm going to try and place these masks quickly. In fact, we'll start here on the left. Okay. Go ahead and do that. And you can fine tweak it as per your requirements. I'm not going to waste too much time, yours nor mine. I'm going to quickly start placing some of these here. And I'm duplicating them by Control-C and Control-V. You can also use Control-D to duplicate as well. Okay, so go ahead and start placing all of those masks. And notice all we're doing is really just covering these zombies up nice and good. All right. Okay, so that looks good. If I switch over to my game scene now, everything looks like it's in order, everything looks good, and we pretty much have our scene ready to go. We've kind of talked about in this episode, we've talked about essentially, setting up the scene, some of the basic general things about Unity, such as the transform and so on and so forth. We've talked about rendering orders for the graphics on our screen, and we've also kind of talked about how we're going to move forward and actually build this game. So I hope that so far this video has been nice and slow, and it has been, very well paced, hopefully, and that everything is in order. And yeah, I think this is going to be a good sort of a stopping point for us in this video, and we will continue off next time from here, and we will start putting in some more behaviors. All right, so thank you so much, and I will see you soon.